Welcome back to our classroom, folks. I'm joined by Mike Tinoco. Mike, did I say that right?
Good. Thank
All
you.
right, all right. It's important for me to make sure I enunciate, I pronounce correctly the names of the folks on my platform. Mike is an educator and a non-violence teacher from San Jose, California, certified trainer in nonviolent communication and Kingian nonviolence. And he is committed to helping create a world that demands justice, centers love, and holds room for everyone to be a part of the beloved community. Thanks for being on the platform, Mike.
Thank you for having me, Roberto. I appreciate it, brother.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm excited to talk to you about your book, about the notion of nonviolence, about your training, your background. And part of the reason is that when I was principal at a small private school in Austin, we were incorporating this. And I saw the difference that it made. And that was a new experience for me because I can't say that in my other stops along the way in my journey as an educator and as a school leader, that this was very present. The NVC was very present, nonviolence communication. So your book is talking about rethinking nonviolence. And I'm curious to know why you find it important to rethink nonviolence.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, a few reasons why I think that's important. I mean, I think the large one is that there are so many misconceptions about what nonviolence is and what it's not. And I know for myself, for the longest time, I held a kind of skewed understanding of what nonviolence was just because of what I was told of what it was. And, this idea that it's just being passive and that it's being not violent and that it's conflict averse, or just merely the absence of violence, when in fact, nonviolence, at its core is really about engaging with conflict, engaging with life, disrupting at times. Sometimes it's messy. It's about making noise. Um, and it's deeply centered in sustaining relationality. So nonviolence is about affirming life and trying to bring people together to create communities, to sustain communities. And I just did not have that understanding until I sort of did a deep dive into nonviolence and started learning and really like understanding how it has been practiced in different movements and particularly the civil rights movement.
And your book, Heart at the Center. So many words that catch my attention there, right? Heart at the center, an educator's guide to sustaining love, hope, and community through nonviolence pedagogy. Oof, that title is full, man. That title is full. And I want you to just for a moment, what's what are the two words in that title that really stand out to you? Is when I read the title, immediately I'm captured by the word love, and I'm also captured by the word sustaining.
Mm.
That because love is so important, right? If we're moving in love, if our words are loving, if our actions are loving, then typically we're gonna see that type of response back. And if we're able to sustain that, then I think we could create a more harmonious society. So when I was just reading your title, I'm like, yeah, man, this hits at the heart, right? Pun intended. But what are the two words in the title of your book that stand out to you?
I appreciate the question. And I don't know that I've ever thought of that. Like,
I
just
just
if
came
I,
up with it. I just came
yeah,
up
no,
with it.
that's great. No, that's great. Narrowing it down to two. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's something about like, I mean, it's similar to what you just said, like being heart centered, like really leading with the heart. And, um, and I'm going to borrow from Dr. King here. Like, to me, that doesn't mean sort of like this emotional bosh, as he would call it, right? It's about being able to um, practice vulnerability,
Mm,
um, discerning when I can sort of take the armor off. There's times where we might need to armor up, right? But being able to discern like when I can um, lean into vulnerability for the sake of creating, sustaining community, practicing empathy, receiving empathy. Sometimes that might just be having empathy for myself, or other times it might be having empathy for others, but really like shifting away from getting just stuck in the head. And there's a time and a place for the kind of intellectualizing and you know all of that, but I find, especially in school, sometimes it folks can be discouraged from quote unquote being emotional or tapping into their emotions and um, feeling like they need to quote act professional. And so I think being able to embrace and acknowledge like the full range of our emotional experience and to have clarity around like what are the needs that these emotions are pointing to is really important. So to answer your question, like everything you said, and like I think just like heart center stands out to me as a prominent idea.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I hope folks really gravitate towards that notion of being heart-centered because there is so much division and there is so much tension. And you got to question why is it so easy for many of us to get caught up in the divide and the barriers instead of breaking down those walls of division and creating a notion of proximity. Getting back to understanding NVC, nonviolent communication. You started getting into this a bit, but can you explain a little bit more uh, NVC and the value in engaging in the practice? Just if you could build on what you started in the first question.
Absolutely. So NVC is short for nonviolent communication. It's a few things. It's a dialogic practice, one that is often used in interpersonal relationships to help strengthen relationships, to support people in navigating conflict. It's also a consciousness practice in that the more I can sort of become adept at being aware of what my needs are in any given moment and my unmet needs and understanding what feelings are connected to those needs, I can move through the world more freely. And what I mean by
Mm,
that, I'm less likely to um, blame other people for what I'm experiencing within myself. And that doesn't absolve other people for things they say or do that may have an impact on me, especially if we're viewing the world through a sort of interdependent lens. But if I'm feeling, let's say, agitated because someone said something that I'm feeling disrespected by, if I can tap into like what need is not being met for me and like what experiences have I had in my life that is kind of stimulating that for me, I can have empathy for myself. Like, oh, okay, I'm really angry when this person said that thing because
mm,
this is reminding me of, you know, all of this history. Um, so envy is a consciousness practice in that sense, where when we can continually be attuned to those needs and our feelings, we can just slow down and not operate from this kind of reactive place where we're resorting to blame and shaming or moralistic judgments. Um, and um, I don't know, I think about as a teacher, it's really helpful to catch when judgments may start to form, whether it's a judgment about a colleague or a student, and to just slow down and notice like, okay, this thought that's arising in my head, there's a need that's beneath that. So can I slow down and really connect with what is that need? And then from there, I can engage with that person differently than if I just am creating a story in my head about who that person is.
Man, those are serious skills for folks to develop, right? Like we need that, and I want to acknowledge that there's serious work to do to be able to master those skills. And I think it would be helpful if you can, right? You mentioned unmet needs. You also talked about identifying feelings. I think it'll be helpful if you can offer an example, if you can share a moment in your own journey where you recognized an unmet need that led to a significant breakthrough or shift in perspective.
For
And
sure.
also, if you could help us, help the listeners consider where to begin as to developing this awareness in their own lives.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And I want to add too, there's a piece here, a really important piece that I want to emphasize that Nonviolent communication rests on the assumption that all behaviors are attempts to meet needs. All behaviors are attempts to meet needs. So that is not something that I grew up with, nor my parents, right? This is something that I learned in adulthood. And I want to just give a couple of examples of like feelings and needs so folks can get a sense. Um, for teachers, I imagine a lot of us have experienced those mornings where like the copy machine is broken, the internet down, you're running late because there's traffic. So you might be feeling really stressed and frazzled because your need for ease isn't being met.
I'm
Okay.
starting to feel stressed with you just describing the scenario.
Right. Yeah. And earlier today, our internet was down. So I was starting to feel like that anxiety. It's like, oh man, like, do I have to come up with something else on the fly? But then there's of course those abundance of beautiful moments where maybe we're sharing stories, poetry in the class with the kids, or it's like the first few days of the school year. Like this is our third week of school. It's just going beautifully, and so I'm feeling a lot of joy and a lot of excitement because there's a need for like community, need for like creating a sense of belonging is starting to happen, right? We're manifesting that together. Um, so those are just a couple of examples of like emotions that we that many of us experience when our needs are met or not met. To answer the other part of your question, can I think of like a pivotal turning point when I was able to recognize a need? Absolutely, man. And actually it's about like learning about nonviolence itself. So this is like way back early in my teaching career when I was kind of stumbling into learning about nonviolence and Dr. King's notion of agape love. um, I remember really gravitating toward wanting to learn more, um, and struggling with like how to articulate it to other friends and educators because I was like so early in this journey. Like I wanted to kind of figure out like, okay, like how do I translate some of this into what I'm doing in the classroom? Some of it I feel like I'm already doing. It's kind of intuitive, and other stuff I was like kind of struggling. Um, and I know that in some social justice spaces, activist spaces, sometimes things can um, get toxic. Sometimes we may resort to patterns in the domination culture unwittingly, shaming, blaming, that creates harm in the first place. And so I would see some of that, and when I'm trying to invoke ideas of nonviolence, like it just fell flat. And um, when I learned about nonviolent communication in particular and got clarity, like the need I'm really wanting to fulfill is hope, hope for a different way of being, um, and and a sense that like this path can offer us a viable way to the future and to the immediate near future where we don't have to mirror this kind of existing paradigm in the domination culture. When I got that clarity for myself, that what I was really wanting, the core need was hope. Um, that helped me just trust and kind of like just forge ahead, even though um, there was some resistance, and not everybody was on board with it at the time that I was trying to share it. And so there was a lot of grief and mourning prior to that. Like I thought like, well, am I off base? Like some folks are just like really not about this nonviolence. And so I was able to kind of remove my judgment of those folks and just trust like, okay, well, they're on their journey, I'm on mine, and this is helping to fulfill my need because this is what feels right for me and for my students. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for taking us there. I think it's important for us to hear of this firsthand experience with the practice of nonviolent communication and also understanding that everything's not necessarily going to go as smoothly as you might think, right? You might envision, but you still got to press forward with the work.
Mhm.
I was intrigued by some of the structure of your book and your own self-reflection, and then you ask the reader to engage in self-reflection also. I'm like, well, let me do it. He's asking the reader to do it. So I want to share my self-reflection, and then you could respond with whatever comes to mind for you as you listen.
Mhm.
Roberto, when you experienced colorism, you felt betrayed because you needed to be affirmed. You quickly learned that skinfolk don't make everyone kinfolk. This is an important lesson because sometimes we develop false pretexts about how people should be, the way they should engage based on certain identifications. And we have to be able to discern that each one of us is different. We are individuals and must respect the uniqueness and the diversity of perspectives and understanding. Be encouraged by the fact that this will inspire you to seek and develop meaningful relationships where there is true human connection and great opportunity to grow in community because the relationships will have more depth, more authenticity, and recognition of the fact that our similarities and differences can both be celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
And this was based on the prompt in which you were reflecting and writing a letter to the younger version of you.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot what chapter that was in, but maybe chapter one.
Yeah.
But I appreciated the prompt, and I wanted to do something different in this interview and engage with the text more fully. And so thank you first and foremost for sharing of yourself, for making yourself vulnerable and sharing your story, and then encouraging the readers to also do some self-reflection. Now I'll open it up for you to respond.
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to thank you for also stepping into that vulnerability. And you said just a moment ago, trying something different on the show. So for like maybe taking a risk in that way, like of maybe sharing something, I don't know if that's more personal than what you would typically share, but already like I'm learning more about you. And I have a clarifying question, if you're open to sharing, which is what time period is this referencing? Like how young is Roberto in that letter that you're writing to?
Yeah, I say probably as young as seventh grade. Let's see, I don't know, 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think seventh grade, probably around 12 years old or so.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that first line really strikes me where you say, Roberto, when you experienced colorism, you felt betrayed because you needed to be affirmed. And I also wonder if you were feeling hurt because you were also wanting some trust, that you could lean on these folks in your community or whatever the context was, but that need wasn't met. And I'm wondering if trust was one of those core needs that just went unfulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And even though I was writing to my younger self and thinking about probably as early as seventh grade, where I'm starting to realize some things, I think the self-reflection is probably even an extension through adolescence and into my adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
especially as I work to create a deeper understanding and more connections with my Dominican identity. My parents are Dominican immigrants from the Dominican Republic, and it's always been a big part of my identity. But I'm Dominican American. I was that's my heritage, but I was born and raised here, so I live in this duality. And but interestingly enough, I've always felt some tension with a number of Dominicans in terms of like not necessarily letting me in because of their own biases,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because of their own internalized issues with
Sure.
blackness,
Mm-hmm.
and so for me, the exercise was helpful in terms of identifying, as we were stating earlier, right? That the unmet need and having this awareness, which I've had, but going through such an exercise also gives me the room, right? The grace, the license to express, to feel, to acknowledge, to address.
And it also helps us to be clear about what kind of spaces we're trying to create with our kids, right? So having that clarity around like what needs were you really longing for to have met, we can be mindful that like, well, our young people too are going to want to have those needs met. So how can we attend to creating spaces that will allow those needs um, to be attended to the greatest extent possible, right? Needs for safety, belonging, trust,
Mhm.
affirmation, etc. There's one other piece I just wanted to say about your self-reflection, which is that I appreciate is that you acknowledge like the pain and the hurt, and like um, you include like what it is that you're really wanting to move toward, which is developing meaningful relationships where there's connection, growth, being part of community, also needs, right? So it's not staying stuck in sort of despair, but moving toward what your vision is, what those needs are. And that was one other piece I just briefly wanted to mention about like what is nonviolent communication. I'm borrowing from a prominent teacher, Mickey Kashtan, when she says needs pull us toward vision. And so when we have clarity about what our needs are, sometimes it's like very microcosmic vision, like I'm hungry and I want food. My vision is to have a nice, nourishing meal. But sometimes it can be more grand, like my vision entails like justice for all people, liberation, and it's pulling us towards something. So it's not just like battling against, but pulling toward. And that's what this evoked for me very much. The latter part of your reflection is like what it's moving you toward.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And honestly, I'm not sure if I could have framed it that way when I was younger. I don't think I had the skills. I don't think I had the language. I don't think I had the self-awareness of what I really needed. And I've never, when I was younger, I also wasn't receiving any of this type of training that would equip me with the skills, right? I props to my teachers for doing what they did, but they weren't doing this,
Right. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
anybody else around me for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is adult Roberto, like who's
mhm,
including the vision piece, right? So I think I'm with you on that. Like younger Mike, when I was writing to younger Mike, I certainly didn't have that clarity about like what I was needing, which is really tragic, right? When we don't even know what
mhm.
we need, not even conscious of it. So yeah.
So just transitioning a bit, we at Multicultural Classroom often talk about counter narratives and challenging dominant stories. And an observation that I made in your book, you introduce the concept of reclaiming our stories to describe creating new stories or interrupting existing ones. I love it. I love it. I love it. So, how can reclaiming our stories reshape our understanding of identity and culture? And how can our listeners start reclaiming their own stories?
Yeah. Such an important question. Um, First off, I think NVC is critical in this regard, because when I have clarity around like what my needs are and I can practice self-empathy, I can remove those kind of judgments that may seep in. And sometimes it's other people's judgments that I can
Mm,
internalize if I'm not careful. So if I'm internalizing other people's judgments about who I am or ought to be, that's not my real story. My real story is about like who are my people, what do I know about my family? And sometimes not all of us are privy to those stories. So that can be life's work to have to kind of excavate and learn. And I know that to be true for myself. Um, but at the core, beneath the sort of labels of like my identity is like there's needs there. And that's sort of the thing we all share as human beings, right? So when I can be attuned to what is what is it that's at the core of what I'm yearning for, um, and I can hold myself with compassion. I can hold others with compassion and not let those judgments seep in. I believe that an important part of reclaiming our stories. I in the book you probably remember that story of the civil rights elder Gloria Washington Lewis Randall, right, who was one of the child soldiers in the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, 1963, and she and her friends and her family, like they were told by white folks like who they needed to be and the kind of the social location they needed to occupy, and they refused um to continue to let that story proliferate. So it was a real gift to be able to talk to her and hear from her about just like very um, um, courageously how they disrupted that story and held firm to the to holding to like what they knew to be true about themselves, that they were beautiful, that they were resilient, that they valued community, and that they were guided by love. And so there's reclamation in that sense about remaining tethered to their own humanity and that of others, which is a really powerful way, I think, of engaging with life, engaging with the world, and requires a tremendous amount of work and skill and training and support, right? Especially when folks are opposed to you, like who are actively like against you, like that takes a lot of work. So it feels important for me to say that like as a nonviolence practitioner and trainer, a lot of my work is about like just honoring where folks are at, having compassion for folks and understanding like not everybody's able to like be at the same place or might not necessarily agree, right, with all of the all that nonviolence entails, but that hopefully we can just move closer and closer toward um, this way of being where we can remain connected to our own humanity and that of others.
Mhm. Well said. Well said. Well, Mike, let's get to the fun part of the interview. If you had an opportunity to have lunch with anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Mm. There's two people who come to mind. One is my paternal grandmother, Rachel, whom I never met. She passed away when my dad was a child, but I've heard just a number of stories about this woman, who, by all accounts, was just like the sweetest person. She, uh, my dad credits her for his being vulnerable and being able to be emotive and raising me. In a way where I learned that it's okay to cry, it's okay to express
Mhm.
myself. So I would love to just meet her and thank her and learn more about her story, and just thank her in particular for just like, I don't know, planting seeds of feminism. Um, and then Dr. King, I would love to have the opportunity to talk to Dr. King and just um, hear like what would he say about where we're at today. I would love to just thank him for the tireless contributions he's made to the world. And those are two people among many.
Great picks. Great picks. Well, what's your message of encouragement to our audience?
Hmm. I think one of the things I would like to say is um, when you're feeling when you're feeling in a pit of despair, to just give yourself permission to slow down, self-connect, empathize, and lean on community. Like find the folks at your school who you can trust. Sometimes we have to go outside of the school to remain connected to our support system. Just stay connected to people. Like don't isolate to the greatest extent possible. And I know sometimes that's hard to do if we're at a site where we might feel isolated. So just giving yourself permission to slow down, self-connect, and do the things that bring you joy because that's your birthright. I know I'm going to rock climb later today. Like that's a non-negotiable for me, doing that multiple times a week. And then the last thing I'll say, and this also I think circles back to an earlier question you asked, Roberto, that I might not have fully answered, which was how can folks begin to practice NVC? There's um, there's a list of feelings and needs available online. You can just Google it, also in my book. But sometimes just having a tangible list of needs and feelings is really helpful for us. Like I keep it with me. I always have a list with me, and sometimes I'll just flip through it if I just need to like slow down and be reminded, like, okay, what am I feeling in this moment? Okay, I can find it, and then why? Like, what's the need beneath or attached to that feeling? Um, so that's what I would say as far as words of encouragement.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Heart at the Center, folks. Where can folks get your book, Heart at the Center, an educator's guide to sustaining love, hope, and community through nonviolence pedagogy?
Yeah, it's available on several online retailers, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Powell's, bookshop.org, Routledge, that's the publisher. I have all the links on my website at miketinoco.com. Um, and yeah, those are the main places where it can be found.
And that's the best spot to follow you if folks want to learn more about your work or they're looking to hire you as a trainer. Is your website the best place to follow you?
I would say so. I'm also on Instagram, and I'm trying to have more of a presence there. Yeah, the handle is Mike, not Mister. Yeah, so Instagram or my website, miketinoco.com.
Well, Mike, thanks for being here. It was a pleasure to engage with you. Again, appreciate just connecting with the work, going through the prompt, learning more about NVC, learning more about your heart for this type of work, and certainly being impacted by what you shared and by the content of your book, Heart at the Center, An Educator's Guide to Sustaining Love, Hope, and Community Through Nonviolence Pedagogy. I definitely want to see more educators gravitate towards this text. I want to see more schools and other spaces, community spaces, implement not just approach, but certainly the way Mike has framed things in his book. I think it's extremely helpful, as he stated, for what we're going through as a country right now. So, folks, seriously, go get yourself a copy of this book. You will not regret it. Thank you, Mike, for being here.
Roberto, thank you, brother. I appreciate the invitation. This was wonderful. Thank you.